Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Lancashire Innovation Festival. Lancashire Innovation Festival is an opportunity to showcase all the fantastic innovation support that's available to businesses to engage with across our county. Throughout October, we have a range of talks, seminars, workshops, discussions, and networking sessions for everyone to join in with. You'll find a full list of everything available at Lancashire Innovation Festival.co.uk. Thanks to you all for tuning into this conversation. If you want to engage with the chat, then please do feel free to use the chat box in the Zoom. If you've got any questions that you'd like to raise for the panel, can I ask that you do that through the box marked Q&A, and our host will manage them throughout the session. Please keep an eye out as well on Twitter for our hashtag LANIF2020 and continue to keep up to date with the conversation out there. Without any further ado, I'll hand you over now to our chair, Jane Binnion, and Dr Sophie Alkhaled to talk to you about social innovation. Thank you very much, Jane and Sophie.
Good morning. Hi, Sophie. Good morning, everyone. It's a beautiful day here in Lancaster. I hope it's nice where you are. We're very excited this morning to be talking about social innovation. And people get a bit confused about what that is. So in a nutshell, it's about new social practices aimed to meet social needs in a better way than existing solutions. And what we're going to do this morning is just have a chat about some of Sophie's work, a little bit about what I do at the Growing Club, and then there's a chance for you to ask questions. So I'm going to start by introducing myself. I'm Jane Binnion. I live in Gallgate near Lancaster. So the university is always very close to us and gets nearer every day. I run an organisation called the Growing Club CIC, and that organisation was founded in 2016 as an experiment because we saw there was a real gap in business education for women. Most women that are running businesses are running micro businesses, and yet they were being overlooked in funding and support for business growth. So we did a little experiment about working with those women in peer-to-peer small groups, and that's how it all started. And now 4 years on, we have lots of other programs going on, all peer-led, all focused on the needs of the women involved. And you may hear a little bit more about that later. First of all, Sophie, please could you introduce yourself and tell us where your interest in social innovation comes from.
Thank you very much, Jane. Hello, good morning, everybody. Yeah, as you mentioned, my name is Sophie Alkhaled. I'm a senior lecturer at Lancaster University in the Management School Department of Entrepreneurship and Strategy. I started there in 2016, so about the same time that you set up the Growing Club. And it just so happened that there was a Horizon 2020 European Commission funded project that was looking at social innovation in marginalised rural areas. And it was a 4-year European Commission funded project. There were 26 partners across Europe and the Mediterranean that were involved. And my background comes in gender and entrepreneurship, particularly looking at women's entrepreneurship in impoverished communities, looking at refugee women and how they engage in entrepreneurship as a means of survival and social change. So when I became part of this project, it was very natural for me to focus more on social innovation from a gendered perspective, particularly from a women's perspective, and see how they engage in social innovation, social entrepreneurship, I also went on a journey of learning the similarities and differences between those two concepts. I would say in a nutshell, the easiest way or the closest difference between them both is that when you engage in a social innovation, it's usually more than just one entrepreneur, which is probably more what we see with social entrepreneurship. It's more of a civil movement. And the second thing as well is that usually a social innovation and all those involved in it push for policy changes as well, which is something, again, I know the Growing Club is very active in doing. So part of my project, through one way or another, met Jane, and you were the case study, or the Growing Club was the case study that I was observing over the last 4 years. But also our 26 partners across Europe had their own social innovations that they were observing. And then we all came together in writing a policy brief, a practice guide, and various deliverables that we gave back to the European Commission. And it finished in March 2020.
Thank you. So what we're going to do over the next just under an hour is Sophie's going to talk about the Social Innovation Practice Guide that got developed. We're meant to have another member of the panel, a guy called Steve Fogg, who may be lost somewhere in hyperspace. He may or may not join us. Steve is from the local enterprise partnership. And I know he has interest in this area. So he may pop on at some point. In the meantime, please feel free to ask questions, put things in the chat. We will be taking your questions later. And at the end, there's a feedback form that we'd like you to fill in that is about the session, but also generally. Hello, Steve, you made it. And I was saying there's a feedback form that you will be asked to, if you wouldn't mind filling in, please, about the session, but more widely about your thoughts on innovation across the county. Steve, can you hear us?
I can hear you, yes.
Good, well done finding us.
Thank you.
You've just missed Sophie's introduction. Oh, okay, there we go.
No, I'm still here. I'm just trying to connect my headphones.
I hope this happens on every session and not just this one. Steve, what we're going to do is, Sophie's introduced herself, as have I. I'd like you to just very briefly, please, introduce yourself and tell us about where your interest in social innovation has come from.
So I'm Steve Fogg. I'm the chair of the Lancashire Enterprise Partnership, and previously was a managing director at BAE Systems. And I guess my drive for social innovation came from my work with BAE, I guess, really. And you know, without going through the history books, you know, as someone who started as an apprentice in a council estate in the middle of Liverpool, to work his way through a company very slowly and methodically, to get to become a managing director of a corporate organisation and sit on a UK board. When I look back on it, whilst I never set out a plan to do that, I realised what I'd just been through is a whole big piece of social mobility, and worked through that and understood how interventions helped me believe in myself and understand I could do bigger and better things. And that started me in this space of understanding how we can improve things and how we can create opportunity and how we can do things better. And then I got very involved in creating positive climates for people to work within, and got very much involved in mental health awareness, and indeed campaigned across the company to put in place a real intervention that would lift awareness in what was classically seen as a heavy male-dominated engineering, shipyards, big manufacturing places. And how can we bring health and social well-being into that agenda without it seeming, best way I could describe it, as soft to some people? And the way we shifted it was into a human touch and advising people that, at the end of the day, when people walk out the gates, they have families, they have lives, they're engaged in all sorts of different things. And bringing that human touch into the workplace is what we set about doing. And that's where my desire and interest came from this. And that's a bit of background.
Brilliant, thank you. Steve, you and I are from a generation where there was social mobility, working class. So as a working class girl, I got to go to university, but as you know, social mobility has pretty much halted over the last few years. So that's a really interesting thing for us to explore. Just a question I'm going to address. Someone has said they can't see all of the participants, only the panelists. That's because we're on webinar mode. But you can see people's comments. So there are just the three of us in the webinar. But as I say, feel free to put comments in the chat or ask questions. Okay, thanks, Steve. Thanks, Sophie. We're going to move on to Sophie now, who's going to, oh, there's my cat. There you go. See my cat? Who's going to a presentation about the work that she was just explaining around the Social Innovation Practice Guide. So I'm going to hand over to you, Sophie. Are you okay?
Yes, thank you, Jane. I'm just going to share my screen with you now. Is that okay?
Brilliant, thank you.
Okay. So, yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I was part of a 4-year project looking at, it was called SIMRA, so Social Innovation in Marginalised Rural Areas. And this guide, whilst it was led and developed by Lancaster University Management School, this is really a culmination of everybody's findings across 26 partners across Europe. So we had partners in Germany, in Spain, we had in countries in Eastern Europe, Egypt and Lebanon as well. So we had a very interesting group of researchers that were engaging in research into social innovation and how communities come together, particularly those in marginalised rural areas, how they come together in order to deal with a challenge, a social issue that probably current policies and local government are unable to tackle or can't tackle, etc. So if you would like any more information on the project, you just go to the SIMRA website, put social innovation in marginalised rural areas, and immediately all the information will come up. All our deliverables, all the summaries of everything that we did will be on there. What I'm going to talk about specifically now is the practice guide. Now, the practice guide is basically it's developed for a person or a group of people who've seen an issue in their community and they want to do something about it, or they've already set up a social innovation and they feel that they've hit a wall with it and they need to refresh their ideas, or they need to go back and think about what they've done and maybe explore different approaches that they may need to take in order to move forward. So you can access this practice guide, anybody can access it. And I've got the link here below for you to look at. If you just put SIMRA practice guide, it comes up immediately on Google. God bless Google. So that's, everything is on there. So the practice guide that we developed, we tried to make it into 7 steps, 7 reasonably easy steps. And I'm going to run you through it right now. As I said, the guide is online if you want more details, but this is just to kind of give you an idea in the short 10 minutes that I have. So first of all, if you want to set up your social innovation, you need to think about, you need to get ready. What's the problem? What's going on around you? What is the challenge? What's motivating you to act? And what can you do as a collective in order to approach this challenge? Sounds very intuitive, very simple, but you'd be surprised to know how many of these case studies that we observed where people just came up with an idea and in a day and a night just started looking for funding and started to get it up and running without really understanding what the issue is and without finding enough people around them to support the process. So sort of once you've established this, you need to do your research and really engage with your community. You need to find out, is this really an issue? Is this just an issue that you're facing or you and a couple of your friends are facing and suddenly you think everybody has this problem? No, you need to go out, do your research, whether it starts online, whether it's going to your local council to find out what information is already there, find out what support there is already for the issue that you are struggling with, so that you can tailor your solution better with using the tools and information that you already have. No need to recreate the wheel. Make the most of what you've already got. So once you've set up your social innovation, you need to develop a strategy plan. You need to decide where are we going to be in 1 year? Where are we going to be in 3 years? Where are we going to be in 5 years? What are the challenges that we think we're going to face? From a legal perspective as well as from a social perspective. And develop that strategy with your team, which is one of the next steps that we're going to talk about, which is you really need to develop a supportive team around you to guide you and to keep you on the right path. And when I use you, I don't just mean the one person, but you as a group and as a collective. At the fourth step, you need to think about finding initial and then sustainable resources. This is something that Jane and I talked about a lot, and which there was no surprise that we found it across all the case studies as well. Again, the social innovations, you become so passionate about this change that you want to engage in, and some people even invest their own money to start off with, or they sort of don't take a wage, or they volunteer for such long periods of time just to get it off the ground. But then we know that we all have rent to pay, bills to pay, mouths to feed, and there comes a point where it's no longer sustainable. So you need to really outline your plan, not only in finding initial funding, but also how is this going to be sustainable over a long period of time. The monitoring was probably one of the strongest themes as well that we had in our research, and that was that people were very excited, very ambitious to set up their social innovations and to run them and to keep moving on, develop and grow it as much as they could without actually constantly monitoring and seeing what they're doing and actually getting feedback along the way, looking at their initial strategy plan and then moving on and then going back to it and seeing, well, what was our plan originally? Where were we going to go next? And of course, I don't mean that in a non-flexible way. Of course, it's going to be an iterative process where you have your plan, but then real life kicks in. Nobody anticipates the changes that happen, particularly with COVID. Of course, your plan is going, and your strategy plan has to be readdressed, but that reflection in itself is a very important step. Let's go back to our original strategy and plan. Let's think about it, readdress it in accordance to the current circumstances, and then continue to move forward. So this monitoring and iterative back and forth process is something that should be continuous throughout and not something that just happens every now and again. Organic growth of your social innovation, and I think this is again something that I found particularly observing Jane and everyone else in the studies also found, that is that you can, when it's community led, you don't have this, right, I'm going to set up my business and I've got a 5-year plan and then I'm going to sell it to a bigger business and move on to something else. This is very different. This is something that has to grow organically over time. Majority of the people, our study shows that majority of the people are volunteering, especially not the core group or the core team. And so this is something that has to grow slowly and organically over time. You have to sort of, Jane mentioned that they have a set of core values that they have. And they are the values that they constantly go back to so they can stay on track to growing naturally with what the social innovation needs over a period of time that might not necessarily have an end in sight, because this is something that's continuous over time. And the final step is kind of linking to what I was talking about in terms of the monitoring, but this is more about evaluating and trying to revitalizing and renewing it. So this is a bigger step that you usually take further on. So once you set up your social innovation, you're constantly monitoring it and getting feedback, but then you have to set a time within your timeline where you think, right, we need to really sit down, reevaluate, and if the social innovation, as I mentioned right at the beginning, if it's starting to slow down, if it's starting to struggle, then there has to be a form of revitalization that takes place, and maybe renew it with some new energy over a period of time. So these are the 7 steps. What we have at the end of this practice guide is a checklist. Now I realize this is really small. You need to sort of go on the checklist, go on the guide and see the checklist for yourself. But it's basically a summary of the 7 steps. And we kind of have a 1 to 10, and maybe over, maybe once a month, once every 2 months, whatever suits your social innovation, you can go and score yourself and see where you're at and whether you are moving forward with all these steps over time. And again, this is an overall monitoring system to make sure that you are going down the right path. And hopefully by monitoring this, and if you see that the numbers are reducing over a period of time, then you know that you need to probably jump to the 7th step and reevaluate and think, where are we? Why are we constantly falling backwards? We need to see where we're at and maybe change or adjust our plan to move forward. So yes, that's it from me. I'm not sure if that was 10 minutes or not. I hope I didn't go over my time. But yeah, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and I'll be happy to talk about it more.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sophie. That was a very short insight, and definitely download the guide. Really useful and free. Is it? So the link is for the guide, the link that was in that slide.
Yeah, the link on that slide is the guide. If you go on the SIMRA website, so you just put simra.com in there, then on there you might feel quite inspired by, there's a lot of case studies on there. There's also what we call innovation actions, which are the 7 new social innovations, which the Growing Club was one of them, that we monitored from 2017 until 2020, and they just started. So there's some for beginners there, or inspiring stories there. Then we have the case studies, which are the more established ones. And in there you've got so many tips, you've got leaflets and practice guide. You've also got the policy guide, which I think is useful for people who really want to engage in policy work. And it is at a European level, which I know is a bit of a sort of unknown at the moment, but there's also different guides in different languages and so on. If somebody's in the UK who's a migrant but wants to read it in Spanish or whatever, it's on there as well.
Brilliant, thank you. And Dan has just put the link in the chat, so that's excellent. Okay, we've got some questions coming in, but I'm going to kick off with one for the panel, please. And I'll start with you, Steve. We know that there is a lot of fantastic social innovation going on in Lancashire. There is. One of the things about social innovators is they don't go, oh yeah, this idea is going to make me my fortune. Okay, and that isn't the motivation for doing it. As a result, often the work remains really low profile. But just, I'm saying that, it's just, we're very excited that Kay Johnson, from the founder of LADA, has just been awarded an MBE, so that is brilliant. But I was wondering, Steve, how do you think we could really raise the profile of this amazing work?
There you go. I think half the battle here is so many people engaged here do it for not for personal gain. They do it because they think it's really important, and they don't feel we should talk about it. They don't think we should celebrate successes. They don't do it for glory. I'll exaggerate for effect, and I think sometimes that does the work a disservice. So I think a really strong comms approach is very important. I think celebrating successes is very important. I also think we often forget the linkages to good business by taking these approaches. So it makes good business sense. It makes good local social sense. And I think the more we link those things up, the more we link to it supports a thriving economy, the more we do things like that, then it starts to elevate the conversation and makes it one part of an overall set of solutions to make a huge difference. So for me, I would encourage people to celebrate, talk about it, publicize a lot of the work. And, people like me and the LEP and other people, my colleagues around the board, draw us in and get us involved, because we will talk about it, we will engage with you, and we will celebrate it. And that's a reach out to people, frankly.
Brilliant. So founders of social innovation projects in Lancashire should be contacting LEP and talking to you about our work.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. Brilliant. Thank you. Sophie, have you got any thoughts on that? How we raise the profile of all the amazing work that's going on in Lancashire?
This is going to sound terribly millennial, but I think that at the moment social media is something that the social innovations need to engage in, simply because of the lack of funding, the lack of financial support. It's as if you are taking responsibility, taking your own business or your own social innovation in your own hands. And actually that might be a good way to start, and hopefully if it takes traction, then you will get other means of being able to advertise and promote what you do. But I think when you're so limited on funding and financial support when it comes to marketing and advertising, you have to sort of do it on your own through social media, which is a good option, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Sophie, that very often it's head down, doing it, and very often the founders, they may not have digital skills, they may not have PR skills, but the work that's going on in Lancashire is really important for Lancashire. And there's just been a comment from Rachel saying, will Lancashire consider developing a social innovation, social enterprise strategy? And there's something in awards. I mean, CELNET do social enterprise awards already, but the idea of a social innovation strategy, I know there's an innovation panel and strategy, but is social innovation going to be a significant part of that, I wonder? Any thoughts, Steve?
Yeah, I think so. Graham Baldwin, who's the Vice Chancellor of UCLAN, for anyone in Lancashire who knows, he's just joined recently. I've asked him to chair the Innovation Board for Lancashire. And I can tell you there's a very mixed bag of people sat around that boardroom hoping to do great things across the whole spectrum of innovation. And I think a reach out to Graham would not be a bad thing. And I will talk to Graham about the aspects of social innovation and how that connects with the broader strategy of innovation that they're putting across Lancashire, if that would help.
Brilliant. That'd be really helpful. Thank you. Of course, all the support we can get, the better. As Sophie said, often on a very, very tiny budget. Often when grants are awarded, they're not for PR and such. Okay, we've got questions coming in. I'm going to pick one here based and this is something that Sophie was talking about that evidence, that monitoring. So a question from Mayor: often social innovation can be harder to evidence. It's not as visible. In your experience, what have been the best ways to measure the impact of social innovation? And I'm just going to comment on that for myself. When we started, at the very outset, I knew we need to measure this. We need to measure this. So I've been running a business before I started a social enterprise. And I was asking people, what do we measure? Because in business, measurement tends to be turnover and how many staff you employ, really. And I thought, okay, social innovation, there are other things we need to measure. And it was so hard to get any support or answers on that. And as you know, Sophie, I came to you a lot. How do we measure it? What should we measure? How, and yet also, this is really important because without measuring, there's no funding. Funders want to know outcomes. So Sophie, I'm going to come to you about that question from Mayor about measurement. Shall I ask it again?
Sure.
So often social innovation can be harder to evidence. It's not as visible. In your experience, what have been the best ways to measure the impact of social innovation?
So I actually thought that what we did with the latest social impact report for the Growing Club was actually a very good way to do it. But before I kind of give the practical, I want to take a step back. I suppose this is what we always do as academics and researchers. We want to go back to the context. The problem with this issue of measurement is not just a Lancashire issue or a UK-based issue. Again, we saw this across all of Europe and the Mediterranean. The issue is that we are not given clear guidance on what these people want. They say, show us impact, show us, but then they're not given clear guidance on what exactly they're looking for and what exactly they need to give you guidance on how to then write up your report, collect your data, because then you're worried, you don't know what they're looking for. So you end up running off, collecting information and data, which takes hours and hours, days and days, unpaid labor of collecting all this information, applying applying it to your report, giving it to them, saying that this is the way I've measured it, and they're not happy with it a lot of the time. So we need to go back to actually asking them to give us guidance on how to do it. So that's not something that we can deal with automatically now, but this is something that you should be calling for. The second thing is that we need to reevaluate the way we measure things and the way we give things value. Measuring can no longer just be something that's quantitative. We can't measure these women were not employed and now they're employed, but they make very little money. Let's say, for example, I'm using a very simple example. Yeah. Well, actually, now that they're working, they're really not making that much money. We need to find a way to really expand our measuring tools and say, yes, but actually a lot of them are off benefits now. A lot of them, they've increased their self-esteem, or a lot of them are able to have a better work-life balance. A lot of them, their children are a lot happier and performing better at school. So we need to, the way that we measure success is still very quantitative and very gendered. So it's not just a case of give us the guidelines of how you want to measure, but also make sure that what we're measuring is more holistic and not just something economic or financial. So that's kind of what I would want to say on that. In terms of, well, what can we do today? What's the solution today? I think the steps that we took in developing your social impact report was going back to the source, going back to the women, getting feedback from them, doing anonymous questionnaires, following up with interviews, and doing it every few years to catch up with the women who started from right from the beginning with you to the ones that just completed the courses, and to really keep a record of that over a period of time, to watch and see their stories, their narratives, how things have improved for them over a period of time. And that in itself should be very powerful and should be a great measuring indicator. But that in itself is not enough if they don't adjust the tools and they don't appreciate social change as much as economic change. It's not going to matter for businesses like yours, for social enterprises like yours, for social innovations like yours. And it would be the same, you know, we're focusing on the Growing Club here. It would be the same if you were doing something for the environment, or if you were doing, you know, setting up a social innovation that's tackling racism, for example. You know, are we just going to look at numbers? Are we just going to look at the economic impact? Or are we really trying to measure this in a very different way that's more holistic and representative of the issue that we're trying to tackle?
Thank you, Sophie. And I'll reinforce that often you get 6 months funding and you're meant to show the social impact of 6 months funding. And of course, social change is a longer journey than that. And you're right. I mean, we work with women around decent work. And yes, we can say, okay, we've got 90 women into work this year. However, that doesn't mean they can feed their children. They might be on really low paid, insecure work that has kept them in poverty. That isn't a good social change. Steve, have you got any thoughts on that, on measurements?
Yeah, and I saw the other question earlier as well. I think businesses, well, we're trying to drive social change and hook it back into businesses and make business responsible too for this. It's quite challenging actually, because businesses get very much focused on a bottom line approach, right? So they get very focused on measuring results for businesses. And, you know, without that, as you well know, they don't survive. So it's a natural instinct to only focus on those things. And I've found the best way to drive change is to start to show how the social changes and interventions can improve business performance by improving the climate in which people operate in, live in, and function in, and therefore the opportunities it creates. And once you start making that connection, you're right. Fundamental cultural change can take many, many years. It's not something you do and see a profit. It's something you do, and initially you have to believe in, and you have to intuitively believe this is going to make a difference. And then a swell of support does start to occur across organizations if you pitch it in the right language. And that's the hardest battle, I think, really. I remember speaking to someone about the mental health stuff that we did. And, you know, his response to me was, Steve, how does this make me perform better? And it's quite a hard bridge to make, actually. But if you describe, let's talk about how you want people to feel at work, how you want people to feel trust, how they want people to know they feel supported, how you want people to feel when they've got a problem, they can actually openly discuss it in this work environment without fear of recrimination or stigma or, you know, any of that stuff. Wouldn't it be great if people could just feel that way and see the difference it makes? And so we started small and we started to develop it, and little mushrooms sprouted and it started to spread. And eventually it took over. And, you know, by the time I left, I think we'd put nearly 6,000 people through an awareness event that frankly was not mandated. It wasn't forced. It's spread by word of mouth. It's spread by general support. And I can tell you from the letters that I received, the impact it had on individuals, the impact it had on cultures, the impact it had on climate was quite profound, actually. And it's a small thing that when you implement well, take your time over it, lobby, convince, pull people's support around it, you can make a huge difference. And I think that's the way to tackle these things.
Thank you. I'm seeing in the chat that people are sharing links and ideas, and that's really useful to look at those. I've got one more question that I think will be really important to anyone running social innovations. I don't know if you haven't read Hilary Cottam's book, Radical Help. I really recommend it, by the way. And one of the things we're clear of in our society in the UK is we're spending a lot of money with an intention of supporting people, but actually it's sticking plaster. We know that. My background, I've worked as a youth worker, I've worked with single moms, I've worked in prison with young men. I've also been a carer, an end-of-life carer. I'm an education welfare officer. So I've done a lot of work in the public sector, and I think most people in the public sector would say our work now is sticking plaster. We need social innovation there. But there was, I was looking at social innovation on the government website around healthy aging. Innovation ideas for healthy aging. And I thought, oh, brilliant. Let's have a look. And they were all digital, and one of them was a robot so relatives can keep an eye on their elderly person. And I'm thinking, is that really the best we can do? My dad's 90, lives alone, has cancer, can hardly see. A robot, yes, that'll really help. And what I'm aware of is that and this came back to Sophie's point very early on, social innovation has to be needs-led. It has to come from service users and not from, I've got an idea for a robot. Anyway, robots are lovely. I love robots. However, what I'm interested in is why do we think the word innovation brings to mind digital and engineering? Steve.
Oh, okay. It's quite interesting, isn't it? Because we've been through a massive industrial transformation, and that's where innovation is naturally housed in people's minds. I come from a design, engineering, and manufacturing background. My whole life has been part of technology innovation. And driving for the latest technical utilization of those solutions. And it's inbuilt in us. We don't see social innovation as an innovation, and engineers and scientists get totally focused on the science and technology. And we need to broaden it, because some of the solutions that we now put in place from an engineering and science point of view, we need to just broaden the agenda and the scope of the thought around it. And I think that's how we can bring people to the table. Equally, when we teach people science and technology and innovation at university, we don't link social innovation into those programs. They are very much technically digital focused. So unless you teach and engage in the broader concepts of innovation, I'm afraid you get what you get, I'm afraid. And that's what we put out. Now, the robot, isn't that classic? So someone goes off and creates great innovations with robots. they don't actually think of the need as Sophie described. Think of how this robot can be utilized, and think of all the many things we could do with a robot, as opposed to tailor the solutions to the needs. And then you might not, of course, design a robot, you might design something completely different. So I think there's a lot to be said with the way we educate people, and it goes back to schools, and it goes back to universities, and it goes back to generally how we bring people through the system.
Thank you. Any thoughts from you, Sophie, on why we think innovation is digital and engineering?
I think everything that Steve said is absolutely spot on. I'm not going to, all the points I fully agree with in terms of education, society, the history. The only thing I would add to that, which is a small but really important element we need to reflect on, is that innovation, when it's automatically linked to engineering and digital, it's because it's a very gendered concept towards men. And this is one element. I'm not just saying that it's all men's fault. I'm not saying that. But it's a deeply, deeply gendered concept, and it's leaning towards masculinity. So as you said, it comes to, the solution, engineering, robots, etc. And that's sort of deeply masculine. And even if girls are involved, or girls at school or women later on in life are involved in that, it is still seen as a deeply masculine industry. Generally speaking, when it comes to changes in society, it comes from women, or it comes from the poorest, or those who are most marginalized. And we know that immediately their voices are not as well heard, or not as well received, and are seen as less important. So this is a social class issue. This is an intersectional issue between class, between gender, migration, etc., etc. So I think that would be one of the reasons, in answer to your question, why it's always kind of automatically assumed to be that way. So again, it's about, exactly as Steve said, we need to go back into how we educate in schools, how we educate in society, that engaging in social innovation or social change is a multifaceted issue. So we have a problem with aging, and we have this robot. How are we going to link those together? This is what we need to do. We need to work on that space in between, and we need to give importance to everything, all aspects, social, cultural, economic, and political, not just focus on one aspect more than another. Can I just say one thing?
Yes, please.
One of Jez Buffin has put, why the focus on marginalised rural communities as opposed to marginalised disadvantaged generally? Really, really, really important question. So when I started on the project in 2016, it had already been developed as social innovation in marginalised rural areas. And by the end of the first year, when we had our conference, our project conference, I said that this is why we're talking about marginalised rural areas. We should be talking about marginalised people who also live in cities and who live in urbanised areas. So actually, along the 4-year project, we did include that. And there were case studies. The one that I used actually with Jane in Lancaster, and there was one that we used in Norway as well, also was one of those kind of narratives or stories that started in focusing on marginalised rural areas, but then found that the problem is also about people being marginalised, not just geographically, but also socially. So thank you, that's a really good question.
Thank you. And we certainly see a lot of seaside towns, for example. There's a lot of poverty and marginalisation in seaside towns. Thank you. So Dan is going to cut us off very soon. So I have one kind of closing question, and I'm going to link it to something Mayor has asked here. Do we think that Lancashire has an ambition to be known for social innovation, or is our manufacturing heritage too strong? And should we just stick to what we've known for already? So my question is linked to that. Can you imagine a time when there is serious investment in social innovation to address the needs of our communities? Can you imagine a time when there will be serious investment in social innovation to address the needs of our communities here in Lancashire? Sophie.
Gosh, so I think probably Steve would be much better placed to answer that question than me. But I have to say, COVID has changed the world. It hasn't just hit Lancaster. It hasn't just hit the UK. It hasn't just hit Europe. And this is a global issue. And I think that the only way that we can move forward is by moving on from our traditional way of life. We are seeing everyday announcements being made, jobs being lost, lives lost. Definitely our governments, our councils, etc., they need to have a complete rethink on how they invest in communities, in local government, in local councils, etc. There's going to be millions of people who are unemployed around the world again, so it's not even a case of we can jump on a plane and go abroad and try. This is a global issue. Yeah, I can imagine it, and it should happen, and it should happen now.
Thank you. And okay, 2 minutes, Steve, before we get boosted out.
Yeah, I actually can. I think it's here and now. I think Sophie's made a great point that COVID has changed everything. And historically, I think great social innovation came from somebody's fight. That's where it came from generally, and that was brought out of deprivation and poverty generally. I think where we are today, we are all in a fight. COVID's got no class or boundaries, and I know it's affected deprived areas. I accept that, but frankly, you can't escape it, and therefore we've all got to change, and we've all got to do something fundamentally differently. And I think Lancashire is ready. Yeah, everybody's right. We talk about the heritage of Lancashire, but actually, go back to what was important in Lancashire in those old days of the heritage of manufacturing. That was innovation at its best. So we know Lancashire can do this. We're now in a different age. We're not arguing about the heritage of manufacturing now. We're arguing about social deprivation, social change. If you look at Blackpool, a seaside town, one of the most deprived areas in the country, there's a wealth of change going on in Blackpool. And I think it's there, and it's there for the good of the county. And we need to bring it to life. We all need to bring it to life. And my job really is to get business wrapped around it to try and bring it to life in an economic way as well as a social way. Because if we connect business, the economy, health and well-being, social interventions will make a massive difference for the county.
Thank you. And just on time, thank you so much, Steve and Sophie. Thank you, Mayor, for making this happen. Thank you, Dan, for all your work in the background. And thank you for everyone that's joined us and your questions and comments. I'm pretty sure you can download the comments, even though it's webinar. Can we, Dan? Can people download the comment thread? He'll tell us in a minute.
Thanks, Jane. No, I can hear you. Thank you.
Okay.
The session has been recorded, and the conversations, the chat conversations from every single session are being pulled together into one place. So everything will be available for everybody in due course.
Thank you. I'm sure we could have carried on for at least another couple of hours. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Sophie. Thank you for making this happen.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jane, thanks very much. And just a final thank you to all the panel for coming together and to deliver what has been an absolutely just an inspiring conversation. I'm sure everyone will agree with the subjects that you've touched on and how this particular session has gone. So Thank you on behalf of everybody. Just a reminder to everybody now that the Lancashire Innovation Festival takes a little pause for the next 3 days as Digital Lancashire are running their digital reboot 2020. So I encourage everybody to engage with the sessions that are available for that. And if you Google Digital Lancashire, I'm sure you'll be able to find some great conversations in there, including discussions around inclusivity and diversity as well. So carry on some of the great themes that we've touched on today. Please keep an eye out as well. We've got 2 weeks left. The back 2 weeks of October are absolutely full of innovation inspired conversations, some real great insights, and some real great debates carrying on there. So in the meantime, the link is just in the chat. We really appreciate everybody's feedback on your thoughts on innovation across Lancashire. Certainly from what I've heard today, there is no doubt some more stuff to go in that particular piece of feedback from what we've been inspired with today. In the meantime though, everybody, thank you once again to the panel, Jane, Sophie, Steve, and look forward to catching up with you again soon. Take care. Bye bye now.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye bye.